Welcome to another episode of Actually, You Can, the podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs and professionals looking to get inspired and take serious action to uplevel their results and fulfillment. I'm your host, Miff, and today we're discussing leadership with Craig Johns, a national champion athlete, high-performance leadership expert, international coach, and host of the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. With over 27 years of experience, Craig shares his insights on creating high-performing team environments, the qualities of great leadership, and how to pursue your goals with relentless determination. He also shares why every aspiring leader should at some point in their life grab a bag, go to the airport, and take the first flight they can get on. So, get ready to learn how to be relentless, but not reckless or ruthless in the pursuit of your next big goal, because actually, you can. Hi, Craig, and welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here on the show.
Thanks, Miff. It's beautiful to be here with you and delve deep into conversation around all things leadership and other aspects of life.
And so before we kick off today's topic on all things leadership, can you please share a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Lovely. So I grew up on a farm, a sort of small town boy living on a farm. I think the nearest neighbor was a mile away. And so I grew up, really deep in thought, I suppose, at a lot of times. So as an introvert, I really, really love being able to explore and do things myself and figure things out. As a child, just loved sport, grew up in sport. I suppose crazy families. My dad's side were all into field hockey, my mum's side all into cricket. And so all these beautiful team sports. And for me, for whatever reason, I still remember as a 10, 11-year-old having the question, why aren't other people as motivated or passionate or disciplined and have that drive to want to achieve something? I could see so many people out there that just were kind of happy to go along with life. And so I had that question and it sat with me for a very, very long time. From there, and love being an athlete, but I think my passion was always around coaching people and leading people. I loved that component, probably more than being an athlete. And so even though I achieved quite a high level as an athlete, winning national titles and representing New Zealand, for me, it's always about how can I create environments for people to thrive and places for people to belong, that can really draw out their strengths and talents and perform at their absolute best. That has drawn me all the way along.
Yeah, and so what does that look like in your day-to-day as well? You mentioned you were an athlete. I'd love to hear more about your achievements as an athlete and perhaps how that translates to what you do day-to-day now.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate as an athlete. I got to play both team sports and also individual. I suppose my genetic makeup is suited more towards power. But for whatever reason, when it came to individual sports, I was really drawn to endurance sports and even going right through to Ironman. So if I was smart, I probably would have chose track cycling. It probably would have suited me, but I loved it. And anytime anyone said no to me or said it was going to be impossible to do something, I always wanted to prove them wrong. So I managed to win national titles in triathlon, duathlon, cycling, and mountain biking, so across 4 sports. And also represented New Zealand as a junior in field hockey. Never played for them, but made the team. And having that drive and dedication, devotion as an individual to achieve an outcome versus being in a team where it's the collective, talent or direction and how we can perform was quite unique. So in field hockey, I played for a team that has New Zealand's longest unbroken streak. And it would be right up there worldwide. So they went 272 games without losing, which is quite phenomenal. And so I played for 5 years. I was the youngest person to be, as a 13-year-old playing Premier hockey. And, I was right at the beginning of it, never lost a game. And I think they went 16 years straight before they lost. And I think they won 22 out of 23 titles. Quite a phenomenal team. We were from like a town of 5,000 people. We were up, beating the biggest cities of, 100,000 plus. And it was something quite special versus, say, in triathlon where I've won races where there were 6,000 people on the start line. And you've got 1 in 6,000 chance versus, say, field hockey where you have a 1 in 50% chance. So I had a great upbringing where, one, I learned how to win and to deal with the pressures of winning and what it takes to stay on top, because it is, everyone's coming after you. Every time each team that comes up against you wants to beat you. So they're bringing 110% every time, and you've always got to stay one step ahead of them. Versus that mindset of being an endurance athlete like yourself, where you're, that 1 in 6,000 people chance of winning is a different set of resilience to require. You're going to get beaten more times than you're going to win, unless you're an absolute freak like a Michael Phelps or someone like that who was able to win more than they lost. But for most cases, you're losing. And so you have to be able to build that resilience there. But then I also had a taste of what success looks like on a repeated basis. That's kind of from an athlete point of view. I think for me now, I started coaching at 15, was a sports scientist, worked with, over 100 Olympians and world champions across different sports. I never individually coached an Olympic champion, but I definitely worked with many along the way. And I always had this dream of coaching a world champion, but also leading being a CEO of a top organization. And so I got to a point where I was around 30, and I was like, I love high performance sport, but I want to have a greater impact than just, 5, 6, maybe 10 people that are around you. Like, it's a very lonely life in a way. It's great because those achievements are amazing, but I wanted to have a greater impact on the world. So I felt being a CEO would give me that opportunity to be able to embed and support people to be more high performing, create spaces of belonging, would create a greater ripple effect, I suppose, throughout the world. And then from where I am now, which is, I think, right in my sweet spot, where now I get to work with a lot of leaders and companies around the world to, spread, what is great leadership, what is, a great company to work for. And so now I'm really, really able to, lean into what drives me and I suppose my natural gifts.
Yeah. And you mentioned that impact is something that obviously sounds like it drives you. What are other things that drive and motivate you?
All right. Now I have a 10-week baby girl, which I think it shifts your whole thinking. It shifts your whole way of being when you have your own children. And so, look, Julie and I were always like, look, if we have children or not, it didn't worry us either way. I think more towards the end, she was, getting like, hey, look, it'd be good to have a family. But they teach you so much. They're a great reflection of you. They are very good at holding you accountable. And I think you have a different perspective on, what life is and, how do you integrate all aspects of life. And I'm not going to use the word balance because I don't think it's right. Balance to me is always standing still. And so, how do you, I suppose, manage and cater for different things in life, but still be able to really thrive and make a positive difference? I think it's so different to being an athlete where you're very single-minded, you're focused on one outcome. Whereas I think once you start having children, it opens your eyes up to a lot more, I suppose, perspectives and ways of living.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that because as an individual athlete, my partner very lovingly reminds me that I have been an individual athlete, so I'm very good at taking care of self. And I don't see that as a bad thing, obviously, as an individual athlete. And I feel like this is in general too, right? You are your number one asset, and it's just emphasized when you're in sport because you need to look after the machine per se. And I'm interested to hear, with your background in not only individual sport, but team sport, sort of what resources are you drawing on to be able to move into that area where you need to create that bit more, I don't like the word balance either, I would refer to it more as integration with other areas of your life?
Yeah, I think, look, working in teams, I'm always someone who has naturally surrounded myself with really diverse people. And to be quite honest, I actually lean in more when I disagree with someone or they have such a different view than I do. I'm just so curious. I want to understand what I don't know or what they've caught that I haven't caught yet. And that fascinates me, that curiosity to want to know more. And so I think, being involved in that team sports and then also in organizations and leading people is having that perspective of being curious and always knowing that everyone else is going to have more to bring to the table than you can on your own.
Yeah.
And as an athlete, right, we are so used to having a very specific destination, a very specific goal where we're going to, for many of us especially in more high performance sport, if it's Olympic sports, then you're focused on, wearing the gold medal, standing on top of a podium, or If you're in a non-Olympic sport, it might be the World Championship. But you're very clear, you can visualize it. And so what you do is you tend to push everything else out of the way that is going to prevent you from achieving that. So you're able to say no to a lot of things, but sometimes we say no to too much. We get too narrow focused. We say no to those relationships that need to support us sometimes, or even having a bit something to divert our focus and attention so we're not on 24/7. When you're in a team environment, a thriving team environment is where you go beyond the role to the actual person and really being able to understand them and connect with them, because it's so important. You can't just be totally focused on the role or totally focused on the outcome. We're all human beings, and the ability to understand each other, the ability to care for each other, actually that's super important. One thing I've learned as a coach and as a leader, I spend 50% of my time, even more than that, on care. Even when I was coaching high performance athletes, 50% of your work is actually all about care. It is showing and people are very vulnerable. The more you go into high performing or getting really driven about something, the more you need that support around you to know that someone actually cares about what you do and that it matters. And so I find that really fascinating that here we are, we're driving performance, whether it's in an organization or with an individual, but in the end, we're all vulnerable on the inside, and we just need that encouragement along the way and that validity, I suppose, or the validation to know that, we're on the right track and someone's got your back every single time.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to hear that you mentioned that in the pursuit of high-performing teams, there is that a really strong emphasis on genuine care for each individual within that team. I think it's really easy, especially in the sporting environment, to just assume it's you look after your physical performance and it's the strongest survive. But in reality, for any thriving team, I feel like once you get into the inside of teams, you notice whether it's directly talked about or not. There is a genuine care for each member of those teams and their welfare and their overall well-being. So it's really great to hear that you see that as a really integral element of high-performing teams, not only at the sport, but in corporate as well. And so I'm interested to hear, what do you define now, I guess, as great leadership? Having all of this previous experience, what does great leadership look like to you?
Great leadership is about being able to create a space where people feel like they belong. And I think it's your number one thing. You've to ensure people feel like they belong to it and feel like their voice can be heard, their voice matters, and that everyone has an integral part to play in what's happening. There's a lot of talk around, obviously diversity and inclusion. And I love what diversity and inclusion has become, where it is actually supporting, in most cases, it's used to represent groups of people that may not have had a voice. Some may say minority groups, some may say they're groups that have been left, haven't really been attended to in a way, and so they don't have that voice. But to me, the word diversity goes well beyond the gender and the age or the race of someone, and it goes well beyond that. And we need to look at what experiences people had. Do they have neurodiversity? Where did they grow up? Did they grow up in a poor family or a rich family? Did they have to struggle through life, or was life really easy on a platter? And we need to be looking at those differences, because each experience that that person has brings something valuable to the group or the team dynamic. And so if you have everyone, say from, say we generalize a little bit here in Australian sport, where in most cases, rugby, they come from private schools. The boys come from private schools, so they're generally more affluent, they generally have money, so everything's a little bit easier in that sense. But they don't always have to fight for anything. And so having that diversity spread out. And so I think that's really important. And we're hearing that talk and I'll just use Australian rugby because I've been hearing it a little bit lately, where they're now talking about the importance of trying to build up rugby in different environments, different socio-economic environments as well. One where they'll get that different perspective on life, or they might have something that fuels them a little bit differently. When it comes to inclusion, the word inclusion has been hijacked in the corporate world, and for all the right reasons that I just mentioned around, groups that haven't had a voice, making sure that from a social perspective, that we're making the right social change and allowing people to be heard and be valued and feel like they belong. But everyone is excluded in life. At different moments, we've been excluded in the playground, we get excluded at parties, we get excluded in many different ways. Every single person does. We're never ever going to have 100% inclusive world. And anyone who thinks they can, it's not going to happen, because anytime you support the growth of and making some people feel more included, you may accidentally or indirectly exclude someone else. It's impossible. But however, how do we constantly work on creating a space where people feel less excluded and more included more often? And so that's the challenge that we face. And it's not easy because, if you look at things like social change, there needs to be a big push, and it gets a little bit combative in a way. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but it does become a little bit tense and a bit stressful as you go through a change and something's brought through and then things settle down again. But how can we create that space where it doesn't matter what you've gone through in life, we're trying to include you where possible, and we're all going to make mistakes, and it's about giving that grace for people when they do. Obviously, if they keep repeating it, then, it's a bit harder to give grace. But we do need to realize that people are human beings. We are going to make mistakes, whether directly or indirectly. We are going to include people and we are going to exclude people. And we just got to try and minimize where we do exclude people.
I really love your definition of great leadership involving diversity. I think it's really easy to say that strong leaders, especially in I've had careers in very, I guess, for lack of a better term, old school environments where great leadership was being a bit dictatorish, for lack of a better term, or working really long hours, working in really high pressure environments. And it's really refreshing to hear you say great leadership is diversity. It has nothing to do with, putting people in environments where they were forced to work really, really long hours to maximize outputs. It's sort of like the work smarter, not harder sort of mentality as well.
Look, still the number one thing that people are searching for and thrive in is happiness in anything in life. And so your role is to help people feel more joy, feel more happy at what they do. If they love what they do, if they're happy in what they do, then the performance is going to come. So there's no point trying to drive a stick, and chase them along the way. But I think there is one thing to realize too. We hear a lot of talk around there, how we need leaders to have an empathetic leadership model or a compassionate leadership model or an inclusive leadership model. You need every type of leadership in different forms. Sometimes you do need to be a little bit autocratic, but you have to have the awareness and understanding when that's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. And so you have to be able to balance all these different things. Let's use Jacinda Ardern. So for those who don't know, Jacinda Ardern was the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Well known for her compassionate leadership and her inclusive, the way she tried to include people, and in some ways tried to keep the peace a little bit earlier on. And unfortunately, that she may, in some people's eyes, be remembered for the wrong things, which was things didn't actually get done. And so lots of promises, not enough things delivered. However, she has created a phenomenal legacy when it comes to leading in a compassionate way and being able to make more of an inclusive environment. And so people focus on the things she may not have done. Now, it's so difficult to get everything right. Like so difficult whether you're a prime minister, which is probably the hardest place in the world to ever make people happy and feel like they're all, it's been worthwhile having them as a leader. But it's impossible to keep everyone happy. It's impossible to always make the right decisions. There are always things that come on the way that prevent you from being able to do what you do best and to bring the best out of people. So my encouragement to people is to understand different ways of leading and then be ready in the right moments to do it. Let's say when COVID hit, those leaders that were very decisive, not really an autocratic, but a lot more decisive mode, who knew when it happened, were very, very clear. They had absolute clarity around, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and here's where we're going. Everyone wanted to follow those people. Those who hesitated, those who were unsure about themselves or unsure where we should go, they're the companies that really struggled and fell apart in a way. And so there are those moments in crisis where you have to take, as a leader, people are looking for you to lead. I was fascinated. Like for me, I found the beginning of COVID Within about 8 hours of everything locking down, I had absolute clarity on what to do next. I didn't know if I was going to be right or wrong, but I had absolute clarity. For me, I was comfortable, and maybe it's because I've worked in, I lived up in a farm with a mile away from the other people. So I was used to being alone in my own head. So I was comfortable with that. I had lived in Asia and seen different crises. I'd worked in environments where there was English, no language. I had remote worked before. So maybe I had some skill sets, but for me, I was super clear. And I was able to determine, and I did a lot for the sport coaching group around, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. Here's your next action. This is where we can go. And I had, people that have coached Olympic champions come knocking on my door. I had people who you would have thought had everything together who were quite lost in that moment of challenge and in crisis. And the only reason why they came to have a conversation or want to be part of something was just because I was able to make a decision at that moment around, here's the next steps. And I was just clear about what we knew, what we didn't know, and then here's the next steps. And I think it's a very simple formula for anyone who deals with crisis, whether it be individually, whether it be a team, even when it be an entire, being prime minister or president of a country. We'll give you grace if you don't quite make it right, as long as you give us direction on where we're going.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things you touched on there that I'd love to dive into a bit more detail. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to get there approach I use quite often with my clients who are like, I just need to get some results. I'm like, great, easy. I can help you create a plan. This is all you need to do, and this is the result that you'll get. And there's some other clients that come to me and they want more of a transformation, which is where we look at exposing them to a whole bunch of different things, and we draw upon different tools and modalities to get there. But to your point, it sounds like those most effective leaders are those who have behavioral flexibility in a sense. They have a whole range of diverse experiences they can draw upon, and they feel confident in being able to lean on to any whenever it calls for. And it's interesting to hear you mention that some people who you thought had it all together fell apart. And to me, it sounds like because they didn't have that sort of behavioral flexibility. What's your thoughts on that? And how can someone as a leader develop more diversity in their experiences to become more flexible?
Beautiful. Love this one. So many of the listeners, and I'm sure Miff, you know him as well, there's a great, I suppose, futurist or person out there named Malcolm Gladwell, great researcher. And he's written a couple of different books. Recent one is Blink. One of the favorite, I think it was David and Goliath was one of them. One of the favorite ones is Tipping Point. Now in Tipping Point, he talks about research that had done previous to him around 10,000 hours to mastery. And, it's a generalization, and it was done over different, people who might be gymnasts or musicians or sports, etc. And it was kind of, a bit of an average in a way. If you've got experiences previously that you can bring to the table, then you might be able to reduce that time, etc. But it's not just about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice done in the right way to achieve mastery. A good friend of mine, Jessica Kiley, talks about 10,000 experiments. So it's 10,000 hours, 10,000 experiments, but I like to go another step further and go 10,000 exposures. And so you think about that person, and we've seen a few of them, and over my time, I've definitely seen them, where they're great on the driving range. Right, so they'll go and hit golf ball after golf ball after golf ball. It's this beautiful shape. They can go play social rounds where there's no pressure, and they can shoot like 3 or 4 or 5 under. Put them in a situation where the wind blows, there's now crowds there, the press has changed, they're in environments they're not exposed to before, and they crumble. And, as a leader, we need to make sure that we're comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I'm sure many people have heard that saying before, by putting yourself in, exposing yourself in a way to different things that will challenge you. For me, I've lived in 5 countries. I've worked in an environment where people spoke 0 English for 3 months, and I could speak about 5 words of that language. And so you learn to see things through different lenses, putting yourselves in situations where you speak to people that you're uncomfortable speaking with because they don't talk about what you normally would talk about at a party. Go and put yourself somewhere where you're going to learn something new. For me, when I listen to podcasts, I'm always looking at different conversations and talking about different topics that I know nothing about Why? Because I might see a different perspective or learn something that then helps bring to, the area that I work in. So how can we always be exposing ourselves? And for me, I spoke earlier about having a 10-week baby, and it's a great accountability as a human being for me, and the exposure that I'm learning every single day and what that little human being is teaching me and what I'm allowing that little human being to teach me is something quite phenomenal. So my leadership journey is just beginning, to be quite honest.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think in terms of anyone who's looking to develop into a really strong leader, figuring out how they can start to expose themselves to more things. And it doesn't have to be move country or do something like drastic, like change your environment radically, but it could be just do little things that are outside the norm. I think it's really common just to become really habitual in what we do day to day. And so it's even just hearing this as a prompt to go, hey, try something different today. Just get a different experience and see how that can support your leadership journey as well.
I encourage every single person that's listening right now to, at one point in your life, grab a bag of clothes, rock up to the airport and take the first flight that you can get on.
Amazing.
Go and do it. And let me know where you end up. Because look, my philosophy is always go get lost.
Go get lost.
And then try and figure out how to get home. I used to do it once a week when I was training as an athlete, when I lived in Taiwan, and didn't know the landscape, not sure where the roads would go. Half of the roads were in a language I couldn't understand or read. And so we used to go exploring and then try and figure out how to get home again. And it was an absolute blast. There was probably a couple of days where it was 40 degrees and I went a couple of extra hours on the bike longer than I should have. But you know what? It was worth it. Absolutely worth it, because I was exposed to a new place. I was exposed to, being able to see something new. I was exposed to pushing my body to a new limit at times. And from those you learn lessons, and every now and then you don't quite get it right, and takes a bit longer to recover from. But you know what? If I hadn't have done it, I wouldn't have known either.
Yeah, 100%. And I think sport was a great enabler to see different areas of the world as well. I think especially for endurance sports or cycling in particular, it took me to some weird and wonderful places in the middle of nowhere in Australia where I probably wouldn't have traveled otherwise, and got to travel the world and see different things. I mean, I haven't actually stepped into the Colosseum in Rome, but I've raced around it a couple of times. And so I think it's taking the opportunity again I love your idea of just packing a bag and going to the airport. And I would wonder, what do you think someone would need to hear to feel okay and feel like they could confidently step into a situation like that?
And should I take it a step further? Do it without a phone or a laptop. It takes courage, right? So, if you're someone that's quite risk adverse to begin with, then you need to slowly build it up. It's not something where we say, okay, well, you're someone that likes to keep a routine and you don't like to step out of that too often, to literally go and say, all right, you're going base jumping today. So it's about stepping up. And it's like anything in life. If you want to grow and evolve, I think a lot of people get fear where they go into a new environment and they're here, for instance, and they got someone way up here and the gap's too big. So what are the steps along the way? A great one around this is speaking. And so I trained a lot of speakers outside of the work I do with Speakers Institute Corporate, where we're dealing more in, working with leaders and employees in a corporate space. I also train people that want to share a message in the world and become more effective public speakers. And so we have to be a little bit careful sometimes, because we come up on stage and we're delivering at our absolute best. And so we're up, we're kind of way up here. They're still down here. And so we need to make sure, yes, we need to show the aspirational. We need to see that. It's like a kid when they, get into sport. They need to see the aspirational of what it's like to be an Olympic champion. But then it's the role of the coach to work with them and go, here's the step-by-step approach. And when it comes to exposing yourself and taking risks, just go, what is one thing I can do that will take me a little bit more out of my comfort zone today than I would have yesterday? How can I improve something 1% more better today than what I did yesterday? And it's not anytime you try and take on that big leap and that big gap in one go, the risk is huge. The emotions you expose yourself to is potentially too much. And you don't want to go into that overconfident state where you're willing to take on anything, go from nothing to everything, you need to be able to step it up. And I know you would have, the beautiful thing about sport in most cases is coaches are really, really good at giving that step-by-step process where they put you in uncomfortable situations, but there's a really tight feedback loop. When it comes to leadership, in most cases, there's no tight feedback loop in place and you have to create it yourself. So think about how can you take yourself to another level and put some sort of feedback mechanism in place so you can review it, understand it. How did you feel? What happened in that situation? What could you do better next time? Then go again. Make sure there's the feedback loop in there. And we do it really, really well in sport. It's not so well done inside the corporate world. And this is one of the things we talk about a lot is rather than the 6-month or 12-month reviews, how can you be providing that feedback on a daily basis? And in sport, we do it all the time. In those that are training to be singers, we'll do it all the time. Those training to be dancers will do it all the time. They have someone there. But in corporate world, we kind of just get on and do our own thing. And if you really want to create a high-performing team, then you need to create tight feedback loops all the way through. Say if they're a new employee, who are they accountable for? What's that nurturing rising talent happening at that first level? Then what's happening as they go from a specialist to a manager, from a manager to a leader, from a leader to executive, from executive to C-suite? Who is that person coaching, training, mentoring along the way to give the feedback that actually will help them learn and continue to grow?
Hi there. If you're listening to this episode, then I know you're an ambitious, driven individual who is working to achieve their next big goal. If this is true, then I'm running a free masterclass in May that you're not going to want to miss. In this masterclass, we'll be discussing 5 ways you can identify your strengths to uncover your unique magic and increase your levels of fulfillment and performance at work. For more information, head to the show notes of this episode. I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, and the word feedback in itself, I think it brings up a lot for people, right? Like some people hear feedback and go, awesome, really great opportunity to grow and evolve. I love feedback. And some people go, oh, I don't want feedback. That means I'm doing something wrong. And so I'm curious to hear from your point of view in a corporate environment, what can feedback look like? Is it literally just one-on-ones with your manager? Is it part of a culture where everyone gives open feedback? So we're all giving feedback on people's ideas and consistently all the time. What can it look like in a corporate environment?
Yeah, look, Navy SEALs do this really, really well too, where, for instance, they will plan for a project or when they would go out into the field. So everything's planned beforehand. They go out and they do it as they're going along. There are feedback mechanisms in the way where they're keeping in contact. Okay, I've moved here. There is now, I can observe this, or, they're giving feedback to each other as they're going along. And then they have a really powerful debrief. And so that cycle keeps going, and that's on a daily basis, even hourly basis sometimes, or a whole project basis. And so being able to implement something in that way in an organization. But when we look at feedback, people are generally used to 2 types of feedback. In most cases, not all cases, most cases. One is cheerleading. Yay, you were awesome, Miff. Awesome, well done. You're great today. It's cheerleading. It's a sugar hit. It lasts for 20 seconds and then it's gone. It doesn't teach anyone anything apart from boosting up their ego for a very short period of time and maybe some of the happy hormones of dopamine and serotonin, etc. But it doesn't actually make a shift in regards to performance long term. Or we get those that go into real critical feedback and sometimes actually very harsh feedback where we start to suppress people, put them down, and it feels like just a negative all the time. So if we can shift in our language in the way that we deliver. So if you're going to deliver feedback on what they've done well, then use positive reinforcement. So Miff, I really like the way that you introed the start of today's podcast. You had great vibrancy, great energy, and beautiful connection with me. I really like the way you do that. Okay, so my feedback is positive. It's super clear exactly what she did well, which now helps shape behavior for the future. And so I don't even need to address some of the other things that may reduce her performance because she now knows clearly, okay, now I need to now I'm doing that well, so I'll keep doing that. and it will remove some of the things that may prevent. Then go into, so we like to spend anywhere around 20%, maybe 30% around that space where you're talking about positive reinforcement. Start with that. Then you go into what we tend to term opportunities or areas of growth. And in this, it's about the way you shape your language. So you can actually share really what people would term critical feedback or really strong feedback in ways they could grow and evolve. But you need to be able to separate the problem from the person. Okay, so a couple of ways you can do this. 2 words that generally tend to make it a personal attack when you're giving feedback. Other words, you. So you did this. Why did you do that? You, right? So it's like, oh, hang on. I didn't tell you to attack me. The other one is why. The word why. You need permission before you can go deep and go why. And so if you start off with like, why, Myth, didn't you take the rubbish bin out last night? Right, it's a person like, hey, hang on, no one told me to take it out. Why are you attacking me now? Versus, say, using words like, Myth, what I observed was that the rubbish wasn't taken out last night. Because so now I've separated the rubbish or taken the rubbish out, the problem, from the human being. So it's, I observed, or it could be, I felt that you could have opened the podcast with a big smile rather than, and then I can share, what it was. So you can build permission into it. So things like, what I observed was, this is what I felt. What if you could? What if we tried this? What would a world look like? Imagine if you could do this. And so you kind of shift the wording around, and it's really valuable. But always finish with the thing you really want them to work on. Because if you go back to a positive, like if you start with a positive and end with a positive, our brains go, hey, we're all good. And so, some people may know the feedback sandwich. It's fundamentally flawed when you go positive, area to work on, positive, because we won't even remember the area to work on. We'll just remember the positives. Our brains are wired to look for positivity. If you just go in with areas to improve, people are then also wired to focus on that negative, and they can't see what else they did really, really well. So you do need the balance of both in a way, but the balance is not flat or standing still. It is 20 to 30%, this is what you did well, but here's now 70 to 80% what you can improve. Now, in saying that, this is feedback for growth. There are times where you need to reward and recognize people for specific achievements where you don't need to share any opportunities. So choose those moments wisely. Are you giving feedback for growth, or are you giving feedback for recognition and reward? Are you giving feedback to boost the ego, to give them a bit of self-worth? And maybe that's when you do a bit of cheerleading. So they all come into play, but the biggest strong point will be when you sit in that space of positive reinforcement and an opportunity for growth, and do it in a way that's not a personal attack.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned the different types of feedback. I think when you hear feedback, to my point previously, some people have one particular connotation of it, but feedback can serve multiple purposes. And I particularly like when you mentioned focus on positive reinforcement and what behavior you want someone to continue to do. I think I've been part of organizations previously where we've been asked to write a stop doing list. And I'm like, stop doing lists are great, but I would add to that and go, stop doing lists, but what great are we going to do instead? What are we going to actually focus on? That will mean that we no longer have to even worrying about the stop doing list, because it won't be a thing.
Yeah, and it could be, what I've observed is that when we're building out lots of lists, we get really overwhelmed. What if we could focus on 3 things per day and remove the clutter? Like, it could be even that. So, and I think it's important now that the whole role of a leader shifted a lot more, and it's becoming more of what we would term more of as a coach in a way. And I think it's important to understand that a coach doesn't just be a coach, right? So if I teach or train someone, I am sharing knowledge for you to learn. If I coach, I'm going to coach you by asking questions for you to have the realization yourself. But then there's mentoring. It's like, here, come with me. I will show you the way to success. And as a leader, you've got to be able to swing between those different, there's more modalities than that. But let's say those 3 areas of teaching, coaching where you're empowered, to here we need to mentor to show you the way. And we need to be able to move between those three, or and maybe even other modalities as we are leading. Because there are times we need to empower, but there's also times where people just need to understand. They may be new to a role, new to something. We just need to teach them something. Then there's other times where they've got to a certain point and they're just trying to figure out where to go. And the best way to do it is to go, hey, look, I've done this before. Come with me. I'll show you the step-by-step approach. Come along the ride and we'll get you there. And so I think that's important, rather than just saying, hey, I'm your leader and tell me, what have you done today? All right, what are you doing tomorrow? It needs to go beyond that. You need to actually help shape the human being so they can be a more high-performing person in their role, in their life, etc. To shape the human being. That would be my biggest encouragement for those who are going into leadership and those who are currently in leadership.
That's such a beautiful way to look at leadership. And I think another way that you view leadership is through your framework of the gravity of leadership. Are you able to share a bit more of exactly what the gravity of leadership means to you? I think you put it so beautifully.
Every human being is a leader. Some lead us up down the wrong garden path. Some lead us in a beautiful direction. Some lead us to absolutely nowhere. We don't know where we are anymore. And so everyone's got ability to lead, and we can lead in different ways, which I think is important to understand. But it's always important to have awareness as a human being, having both self-awareness, but awareness of the people around us and awareness of the environment. And to always think about, what is your gravity of leadership today? Are you creating a gravitational pull where people want to come in and belong and be part of something? Or are you creating a gravitational push which pushes them away? A good leader sometimes will create a gravitational push. So I want to be clear about this. It's not always about pull. Sometimes you need to create a gravitational push for someone to actually realize something and go off and be what they really want to be deep down. Sometimes they need that push to go out alone or go into a different group and environment, because you can tell they're not thriving in this environment. It's not quite connected to them. And you know what? Be comfortable to do that. Be brave as a leader. Like I've had someone recently who is, great in corporate training, great in professional development, but their heart was 100% in personal development and being able to create a social change. They are a phenomenal human being, but in ways that our environment was a great space for them, they actually needed another space to go above and beyond and really be able to make a difference in the world. And so sometimes it may not end so well, but in the long term, it's going to flourish. And so sometimes we have uncomfortable situations or conversations where gravitational push occurs, and that's okay. But we want to minimize those. They're special cases where it means the right thing for that right person. And it's not as though you're going to put someone down. It's not as though it's a big negative. It is just creating a space where they realize that it's okay to let go of this, and because I'm going to thrive in this space. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's hard in the moment sometimes, but it is important. So how can you create a gravitational push? And we were talking about earlier about the importance of making sure we have that space where people feel included and feel like they belong, and try and minimize those opportunities where we exclude people. There's a beautiful word in New Zealand called whakapapa. And the whakapapa, has been described as a place of belonging. And when you delve deep into it, it's like having an unbroken strand of DNA from your ancestors right through, and every interaction that's been part of that group along the way, or for you as a human being, to the present, and then into the future, to the future generations that you'll never meet. And it's this beautiful collection of everyone and the environments and the exposures we've had along the way to create that DNA in the future. And so it's important to understand when you're leading a team or leading a group or leading a family, what is that lineage? What makes up the DNA? Now, I spoke speak quite a bit in Māori. I don't have any Māori bloodlines, but I do have Māori in my DNA because I grew up in environments around those people, and it's a huge part of who I am. And so, it's important to, I suppose, understand that and be thinking about what is that environment or that space that you're creating so that future generations can thrive well beyond you ever getting to meet them. When it comes to your gravity of leadership too, we need to be, driving towards, something. Is it excellence? Is it a destination? And a great leader will be relentless in their pursuit of excellence or that goal or that vision. We see it, say, with Steve Jobs at Apple, or we see someone like Oprah Winfrey as her ability to shape the human being in a way extremely relentless. So there's a non-stop commitment to it. Now, when we think about relentless, it's not about 24/7. Right? High-performing people aren't on 24/7, but when they're on, they are relentlessly on. And because they understand they need that space to recover, and they need that space to have other things in their life to not balance themselves out, but to make them more see different perspectives, but also give them that feeling of fulfillment. So we need that recovery, we need that time out. But when we're on, we have that non-stop commitment. But we need to be relentless without being ruthless. And so ruthless is described as taking no prisoners. And so we need to be relentless in pursuit of something, but without having a cost on other people or even themselves. And so it's important that we don't lack compassion or we don't forget about other people in our life. And that's damn hard sometimes. Like, I've got a startup that's scaling, around the globe. And at times you have to be driven. You have to be very focused on it. You have to be relentless at what you do, but it cannot be in place of forgetting about my wife and my family and now a daughter. So there will be times where you might need to be more focused on whatever the dream is, whatever the vision is. And it might feel a bit ruthless at that time, but we've got to be careful we don't stand ruthless for too long, because it will damage relationships. It will destroy the environment we need around us to be thriving human beings. So not only do we need to be relentless without being ruthless, we also need to be relentless without being ruthless or reckless. And reckless is careless of the consequences. A great example right now, and I've used a lot of sport analogies, we have a runner from New Zealand called Jake Robertson. And he's been given an 8-year ban as an athlete due to taking EPO. And so he made what he says is one wrong decision, which the consequences, he was careless of the consequences of taking EPO. Actually, there's more than one, because he made a second one where he tried to cover it up and make up a story around it. So he was kind of careless of the consequences. Now, right now, the result of his actions of trying to keep up in the world of endurance sports, where prize money is reducing, less sponsorships are coming on board. It's quite a tough space for an elite athlete right now, unless you're the top couple of athletes. Outside of that, really difficult right now with recession kicking in. And so he made a decision that was careless of the consequences, which now has resulted in an 8-year ban. But going beyond that, has now had a detrimental effect on his relationship with his brother, Zane is also a top endurance runner around the world, who may not ever have that same relationship with him again. What is the damage, the collateral damage in a way, the unintended consequences of how that's affecting as a family? And so we need to be in a space. If I use someone, and I think this is pretty widely known in the media, someone like Elon Musk, relentless in the pursuit of putting people in space, of automatic vehicles, autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, all that sort of thing. Like, phenomenally driven, with amazing visionary. But he's extremely ruthless. He's through 3 marriages. His teenage sons won't talk to him. There's plenty of spats in the media around the way employees trust him, don't trust him, etc. And he's somewhat careless of the consequences. He recently said everyone has to be back in the office. No one can work remotely anymore. No one has flexible. It's you're in the office or you're out. And so It's fascinating, and I feel that you can achieve excellence by being relentless without being ruthless or reckless, even though we see people be ruthless and reckless and perceivably achieve success. So yeah, how can you stay in that relentless mode? I'm going to talk about Elon just a little bit longer here because I think it's fascinating. If the vision is so compelling, right? So putting normal human beings in space, the vision is compelling. Creating electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles, that's compelling. And he's so driven in the way that he wants to go there. Human beings are actually willing to allow things that might exclude them, or the ruthlessness or the recklessness, it gets overridden by this big dream. So it is fascinating. Yes, would I agree with his approach as a leader? Probably not. However, the vision is so strong that people are able to wave away the ruthlessness and recklessness effects that it may have on them just for the big dream. So that's interesting to watch. However, I reckon you can do it by just being relentless.
And so I love the topic of Elon Musk. I think it is fascinating too. I didn't know quite the backstory because I just see his success, right? Like on paper and how well he seems to be doing, but that's obviously come at a cost. And I'd love to hear from you. How can someone identify themselves as being relentless?
We fall into a relentless space when we have absolute clarity. Athletes, and I'm going to use them again because it's an easy one for people to visualize. As an athlete growing up, once you make a decision on what your goal is, and for many aspiring athletes, it's about standing on the podium, either Olympic gold medal or a world championship gold medal. They can visualize. It's absolutely clear what they're going to do in 4 or 8 years' time. And then it makes it super easy to say no. When you have absolute clarity on your vision, on your destination, it is super easy to say no to the things that are going to distract you, prevent you from achieving that outcome. For those people who don't have clarity on where they're going, they say yes to everything. And I wonder why they don't really achieve anything. And so the relentlessness occurs when you find what that destination is, find what that vision, what that dream is, what that goal, what the outcome is going to be. And then it's really easy to be relentless in a way. The challenge when it comes to being relentless, though, is being able to put boundaries in place. As human beings, we're seeking boundaries all the time. When we're young kids, we will push our parents until they say and put a halt to the behavior. We will ride our bicycle so fast until we fall off. And so obviously the role of a parent is to make sure we put boundaries in place that have flexibility. We don't want them too tight because they will cause trouble. They will figure out a way to get around it or behave in a way that you probably don't want them to. But we need to give some guides, some boundaries on that. And I think what's important is once you set your goal and your vision on something, what are the boundaries? And the biggest thing around that is energy management. You need boundaries on the length and time of day you're going to spend doing something. You need to put boundaries on the way you may even set up your day or the way you work with people. It's super, super important because otherwise we fall into that trap of burning the midnight candle and we work and we work and we work and we work. And we don't take the time to look after ourselves, and we don't take the time to ensure that everyone else is coming along for the ride as well. Like sometimes we can move so fast that people can't keep up. And so we fall into a ruthless mode. So in that relentless space, and I see this a lot with athletes, they're so used to understanding when they get recovery right or wrong. The triggers are so strong. My legs are fatigued. I'm too tired. I can't react as fast. I can't move as fast. And so they know when they got recovery wrong. When it comes to the corporate world or spaces where it's not a physical thing, unless there's a catastrophic event, there are no strong triggers to when we're getting recovery wrong. So we need to be really proactive in the way we schedule breaks during the day. We reschedule maybe our overseas trip or some time off during the year because our body's so good at adapting. Because the mental fatigue is generally really small, we keep adapting, go, oh, this is the new, this is the new right, this is correct, this is correct, it's correct. And we keep dropping down. And we've seen it so many times. When people get to a holiday, they take a couple of days off and then they get sick. And the body's gone, oh, look, the body will go, hey, great, you're giving me some recovery. All right, I'm going to punish you now because you haven't rested or recovered all year. So I'm going to punish you now to teach you a lesson. And so, you're sick during your holiday. You might come up for a breath. Say it's around Christmas, New Year's time in New Zealand, Australia, where we tend to have, a big summer break. And you have a big party, you go out and you don't get much sleep, and you might drink too much for some people or eat too much. And then you get sick again, or you feel really low energy again. The body's just saying, hey, you're not learning a lesson yet. And so we may spend that whole time in the holiday trying to recover when we should be actually thriving and enjoying our holiday, because we haven't been proactive in looking after our recovery throughout the whole year. And so it's super important. We can only perform mentally at a high performance level for around about 45 minutes to an hour before it starts to decline. But the good thing is it only takes 15 to 20 minutes after that period of time to get you back into a space where you can go another 45 minutes to an hour at high performance mode. It's like interval training in sport, but you have to give it that recovery. So the longer you go working in a high performance mode, in a high, shall we say, stress or workload mode, the longer it takes to recover. Same as athletes, same principle. So I like to work on a 3-to-1. So if you go 45 minutes, that's three parts. And then the one part is the 15-minute recovery. Now, in a working space, that might be getting up, going for a walk. It could be taking a phone call. It may be shifting tasks that doesn't require lots of mental loading in a way, or mental stress, and then come back into it. If you think about it, those people that smoke and have a smoko break, they actually got recovery right. They got the 3-to-1 right. And unfortunately, they're probably not advisable, affecting their health and brain cells in a different way. But they actually got that 3-to-1 work to rest ratio pretty well. So yeah, be proactive in your energy management so you can be relentless without being ruthless or reckless.
And it sounds like there's lots of great lessons we can learn from the sporting world in the pursuit of being relentless. And I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, but if we have high achievers, ambitious people who are looking to achieve really great things, I think as part of that, you need to be relentless, because you'll face challenges and you'll be invited at every opportunity to give up, and that quality of relentlessness needs to be there if you want to achieve anything big, I guess, in your life. And it sounds like we can learn a lot from the athlete world in terms of periodization, and just our approach to achieving our goal is make sure we schedule in regular rest breaks, make sure we are looking after our health, because if we're unwell, we're unable to perform and be productive anyway. And so it sounds like it's really easy for athletes, because essentially it's their job to look after themselves. It's when you take yourself out of the context of being an athlete and try to do all the things in the real world where, recovery might not even be normalized in some of the environments that you're in. If you're taking a break, then you're seen as weak or not working hard enough. It really sounds like it's the opposite. We really need to treat ourselves almost like performance athletes, but at work instead.
100%. And the one thing athletes do really well that we don't do so well in a work situation is the proximity of people we surround ourselves. Who are those people that are advising you? Who are those people that are holding you accountable? Who's that coach in your life? And so whether you're in most cases, the CEO is probably one of the loneliest people in a company. And so it's super important that they have someone they can speak to in confidence, because you're taking on, absorbing so much. You need to have people around you that can not only listen to you or not only advise you, but they're also able and encourage you, but also hold up the mirror and say, this is what I'm observing. Is this the behavior, or is this the action you really want to take? Because this is what I'm observing. I'm going to hold up the mirror now and allow them to actually be able to take that on. Most cases, if you've got a good proximity around you, one, they will encourage you and inspire you, but they will also agitate you at times. If they're not agitating, they're not holding the mirror up strong enough. You need to see the reflection of your behavior and your actions and the decisions that you're making, because in most cases, they're going to be really good. But we can also have blind spots to how our behavior is shifting and evolving over time in different situations as we go through life. Anyone can be a great leader. Anyone can be a great human being when everything's going well. But we always see the true depth and breadth of someone's character when there is absolute crisis and phenomenal success. that's when the true character of human beings come out. It's not when everything's going well, because anyone can lead in those spaces and anyone can be a good human being when everything's going well. It's how do you cope with your own emotions and your decisions and work with other people in great adversity or great success.
Yeah, and I love the mention of having people in proximity and having a support crew. I think especially as you're working way up in corporate, you might lean on coaches and mentors to get you to that higher level. But it's also, I guess the saying is what got you somewhere is what essentially attributes your success. Just because you achieve those high level results doesn't mean you suddenly get rid of all that support framework that helped you get there in the first place.
My encouragement to everyone has always been nurturing rising talent. Always be preparing someone for something that before they even get there. We're starting to see a shift in the corporate world, which is great. Even the sport team world and other areas where we're now seeing people develop our leadership skills early before they go into what would be defined as a real people manager or leader space. Because too often we see someone be really highly skilled at what they do, and one day they tap them on the shoulder, it'll be a Friday, and say, by the way, you're leading a team on Monday. They've got no training, nothing. They might have spent 3 to 5 years at university training in a specific area. They've worked for 5 to 10 years in a specific task and mastered that and been relentless at what they do and, achieve something, and then, tap on the shoulder, by the way, you're a leader. And that's a whole different skill set. And unless you are exposing yourself, experimenting yourself, educating yourself, or someone else is helping along the way to prepare you for that, it's a big step. It's a big, big step. And so these are kind of the life skills or the true human skills that get left alone sometimes. And, whether it's a company or a sports team or anything like that, a lot of the time we blame the person for not being a great leader. We should actually be looking at whoever made the decision to choose them as a leader and say, did you actually set them up for success or set them up for failure? And so we need to do a better job of this in ensuring that we are able to constantly nurture rising talent throughout the organization. And it doesn't matter whether you've been there 1 month or 40 years. Everyone should be in a nurturing rising talent mode. Everyone should be open to encouragement and development and growth at any point in time in their career. And no one should ever feel like they know more than anyone else. We can all learn from each other, but we need to be thinking from a futuristic point of view. What roles or do we see for them in a team environment or a work environment in the future? And how can we ensure that we help them build the skill sets and resilience to be able to be relatively ready for it? I mean, you can't always be 100% ready because it's going to be unique. Because we want people to thrive. We don't want them to be, trying to survive in a role and trying to make stuff up so it looks like they know what they're talking about. We actually want to be people in a space where they can, be their best from day one.
That's such wonderful feedback, and you've dropped so many nuggets of wisdom throughout this whole conversation. I really look forward to revisiting and just pulling them all out for myself, and I hope all the listeners get the same from this as well. And I'd love to hear if you have anything else you'd love to share. If someone is looking to be relentless in their pursuit without being ruthless or reckless, is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't touched on?
Be kind to yourself, and whatever happens, no matter what, you'll be okay.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Craig. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on here today, and thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Miff. And look forward to learning more from the listeners and, enjoying this series as you continue to talk with amazing people on your Actually You Can show.
Thank you so much. And if people want to keep in touch with you, how is the best place for them to do that?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest, or you can jump onto craigjohns.com.au.
Perfect. And I'll drop all those details in the show notes below as well. So thank you again so much, Craig. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of the Actually You Can podcast. I so enjoy having you here, and I hope you've taken away powerful insights and tools that will support you to achieve your high-level results. Now, before you go apply all this wisdom in your life, I would be so grateful if you are able to leave us a podcast review on the platform that you're listening to, or share this episode with a friend. Your support means that we can help more self-led, high-performing individuals just like you expand what's possible for them. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. So please go on and shoot me a note on socials and let me know what you think. You can find me on Instagram as Miff Galloway. Now, go and make those dreams a reality, because actually, you can. Speak to you soon.